Hi everybody, I'm Lady Sylvine, and welcome to my realm of purpose. Today we're going to be talking about the Scaled Ones, a rather obscure piece of lore, but it's definitely worth taking a look at because, well, you'll find out later in the video. Now, a rough summary of what they are for a catch up to people who know and people who just outright don't know. What these Scaled Ones are this, well, at least what they appear to be is this humanoid reptilian race. At least comes across as this new race. Kind of similar to how, the Kunari are this race, elves are this race, blah, blah. They seem to be another one of those, but they're just lizard men. Take that with a grain of salt, but that's just kind of what they come across. I also want to point out that there is literally one codex entry for these definitively. And then there's just a bunch of extra, mystery, there could be this, but it probably isn't, kind of stuff. In this video we will go over that codex, because it's a hefty chunk of information in that I want to dive right into. And I will summarise the story of it, because it's a good story too. I want to start off by talking about the bits of art that you find around Inquisition when you go travelling to random places. So there's not much you can pull from the meaning of where they are and why they're there. There's a lot of reused assets that get thrown around, and it's very hard to tell what is meant to be there for a reason and what's not. Usually you can kind of tell, but with this I think it's just, they've just been thrown around because, oh look, art. People tend to assume this is a depiction of one of the Scaled Ones, but that's never been official. That's something that we theorize, speculate on, because it just, what else could they be? So, it's not canon. It could be. We don't know yet. But the one place I do want to quickly point out before we get into the rest of the video is that there is one location that exists where I think it has meaning, and that is in the Temple of Durthamin, where you find some very interesting artwork that I feel like I want to talk about in a different video, but it would involve me going into the elven gods as well. But it's the elves again. The elves again, why? I do want to go into that, why that's there, and I do want to talk about the Temple of Durthamin. I might talk about that in a video about Durthamin. So that's the only place where I want to say, keep that in mind. That'll be interesting to talk about later. Without further ado, let's just dive into the codex, because that is where the bulk of the information is going to be about them. And prepare yourself, I've got a lot of notes. I literally went for it line by line and went, what does this mean? This tells us this. So, buckle in. Alright, so, the codex. The codex in question is called Chronicles of the Forgotten War. And you find this codex, interestingly enough, in the Descent DLC for Inquisition. You find it, I think it's pretty late on in the DLC, you find it in the Forgotten Caverns and the Bastion of the Pure, and that's pretty much close to the end of the DLC. You find it in 5 parts. You know the type. You find the initial codex, and then as you walk around and look for more information, it keeps updating new parts to it. And that's separated into 5 parts, but will make this a lot easier to analyse, actually. So the events of this codex take place in the Ancient Age, so sometime between negative 1195 Ancient and negative 975, I believe? Yeah, negative 975 Ancient. That time period, I'll explain it later, but for reference, that's when these events take place. It was a good while ago. So contained within this codex is this story that's told from the point of view of a young dwarven warrior, fresh from the proving grounds. He and his father and a band of warriors are sent on this expedition into the Deep Roads to Cad Halash, now known as the Kadash Tig. Well, what remains of the Kadash Tig, given what happened with the Blight. So this is why I did the Cad Halash video before this one, because I had to explain what Cad Halash was for why this is a reference point for when this happened. Anyway, so they're headed in that direction because there's been some attacks north of the Tig. So they go there and they're attacked by these large Tevinter human, quote unquote, sized creatures that they end up calling the Scaled Ones. And let me tell you, they are attacked viciously. Like, the detail of it is detail of it is quite visceral, I think is the word. So, the Scaled Ones do have weapons, but they use their teeth and talons to literally rip them apart. It's quite horrific. After the attack, they do still press on to follow after these creatures. They come across what appears to be this sort of ritual, where they've taken the bodies of the people that they just slain, and they've kind of strung their bodies up in what seems to be some kind of ceremonial fashion. And this feminine robed Scaled One to collect the blood that she sets on fire. They scout out this horrific scene and they go back to go get the rest of their men, and then they come back and there's no evidence that anything happened, really. There's nothing there, no tracks. There's nothing left, basically, but these scorched bowls that had collected the blood. So it's a bit of a mystery, and that's about where this codex ends. So yeah, that is the rough story of it. Part 1. So this part talks about a few things, and I'll go over it bit by bit to make it simple. The first bit of information we get that's important is that these attacks happen north of Cadhalash, otherwise known as the Kadashtaig nowadays, which has now been taken over by the Blight and isn't inhabited anymore. This tells us roughly when these events take place, because we have a fixed date in history of when Cadhalash stopped being called Cadhalash. So this definitely sets the date for reference. I'll put it on screen somewhere. The second bit of information we get is that the Crown knows about this expedition and effectively ordered it. They are sending soldiers to assist those under attack, which lets us know that it would have been in official records. This information, if we do return to the dwarves, this should be written in the memories. The dwarves should have a written history of this beyond this codex entry, which is someone's written statement of what happened. Kind of like a police report, kind of. So it is an official thing. We should hear more about it in future dates, unless, in typical Shaper It fashion, they kind of go, no, we'll just not let people know about this one, guys. They do that a lot, by the way. We do know that this is pre-Darkspawn era. This isn't something they directly tell us, but if this is Cadhalash era, if the dwarves are wandering the deep roads freely, the Darkspawn aren't there. This is before the Darkspawn became a thing. This is before the Magisters broke into the Golden/Black City. I want to point this out because it's very strange that this is the only record of these creatures existing, because it's not like the dwarves weren't using the deep roads. It's not like they could have hid very well. Part 2. So, it's a day north of Cadhalash, which is... It doesn't feel like they've gone that far, I want to point out. Like, this is pretty near civilization. For them, at least. So, their torches mysteriously go out. I want to draw attention to that, because torches don't just go out. When these torches go out is when the Scaled Ones attack, hard and fast. And I want to mention that they have some kind of ability to extinguish light. It's strange. I don't know much more to say on it. I just want to point that out, that it seems like they purposefully put their torches out. Because I don't really think any other creatures have been able to do that in the series. They probably are able to. Magic exists, but it's never been done, as far as I can recall. Mention it in the comments. I really am curious, if there's anything similar to any of these events has happened in the series, because I can't recall it. Next point is, they attack hard and fast. It seems purposeful what's happened. They're being ambushed. It's explicitly said that the Scaled Ones brave slow and heavy. So, I don't know, I get a very heaving beast kind of feel to it, so it's just more so a descriptor of what they could look like, was the mass and composition of them. Because it is just a descriptor we're given. And the author of the codex describes their shadows as darker than darkness, which is just an interesting statement from a dwarf who's never seen sunlight, or has any real reference point for light and dark. Which is, yeah, okay, I don't know much about caves, I'm terrified of them, and how exactly they work, but it's just, I don't know, for there to be shadows and darkness, there has to be light. So it's just very strange that this seems like something that would, a darkness that, in my mind, terrifies dwarves, just seems like, oh shit. So I just want to point that out. So later in this part, it talks about how, it is a rather vicious part, but they tear the arm off of the body of a dwarf in like one quick motion. And the arm is still like holding the chest plate of, I believe it's the father and son in this codex. The father is kind of like holding his son's chest plate, like grabbing him, giving him an order or trying to push him back, it's unclear. But the arm is still hanging, but their body's gone, and that's just the power level of these creatures. Part 3. They call them the Scaled Ones because they have to call them something. I'll go into that in a little bit, but the next part of it talks about they attacked in darkness. One of the dwarves had been lighting a torch when one attacked. This is a speculation point. Does that imply that they just abhor light? Are they kind of like light sensitive? Or do they just know that they've been given away by being seen? It just feels important, that one part. They describe it as a man's body like those of the Imperium humans. So they're like masculine and humanoid is what that part tells us. They're covered in scales is the interesting part. Reptilian, perhaps even fish-like. It seems like they're more so lizard-like or snake-like. The mention of the Imperium, as the mention of Catalash earlier, indicates that this happened after the founding of the Imperium in 1195 Ancient, so that gives us a rough time frame, as I mentioned earlier. I also want to point out that they've been around long enough that this random dwarf would understand what an Imperium human looks like, especially a warrior caste one. I just feel like it indicates that a significant amount of time after the founding of the Imperium happened, but once again that is just speculation on my part, but I feel like it makes sense, so I'm gonna go with it. The Scaled Ones they describe as wearing armour, and one has a dagger hanging from its hip. So they are intelligent enough to make use of armour, and they have weapons. But they don't seem to use their weapons. Like, all of this codex describes them as using their talons and their fangs, rather than using their actual weapons that they're carrying. So, I also want to point out as a tangent of that the word used is talons, not claws. Talons and claws are very different things, for reference. Yeah, really quick tangent actually, I just want to point out that it's interesting that that is the word they used. So why have weapons like daggers? Are they ceremonial daggers? And it's a dagger. For reference, it's just, they don't have big bulky weapons, they have daggers, and I feel like that means something. But they don't use them, so maybe they're like the, I can't recall what the actual weapon is, but you know how samurai have, they carry, I believe, a second sword? I'm probably butchering up my history here, but they carried a second ceremonial blade that was meant for seppuku, stuff like that. So maybe it's something like that? Maybe? I really don't know. Their armour seems to be very strong. A full strength swing from a dwarven warrior of all things just bounces straight off of it. And I know as a joke in any kind of fantasy setting nowadays that, wow, that weapon went straight through that armour like it literally was nothing. They might as well have been wearing paper. And I know that's a joke, like, oh wow, I'm pointing out that armour works. I don't know, I just feel like if these are such obscure primitive beasts, surely a dwarven warrior swinging at them with an axe would not just bounce off of the armour. They've got pretty good armour is what I want to point out. They also point out that it ricochets up the arm of the dwarf, suggesting that it really is some heavy duty armour that they're using. Which is strange because they're using stealth. Just, they get in, get out, before you know what's going on, so it's strange that they seem to have such strong armour. Where did they get it? Why do they have it? Why have they not turned up at any other point? It's so strange. So they do appear to communicate intelligently enough that they can relay instructions and information to one another. Though the language itself is unknown, it can still be understood as a language. It's not like a bunch of gazelle going saying there's a predator nearby. They seem to actually be speaking to one another, which indicates a lot about their level of intelligence. The Codex also points out that they're quite weak around the head, which I guess makes sense though. But they specifically point it out, like, why don't they wear helmets if that's the case? Like, they have such super armor. Why don't they fucking wear helmets? I have this issue with a lot of media where it's like, well, not every single soldier on this bloody battlefield should have a helmet on. The only reason they don't is because they want you to see what their faces look like. They want you to see actors emoting. But in this context, it doesn't make sense that they're not wearing helmets because they're clearly weak under the armor, which I guess maybe they just, I don't know. So, upon the death of one of their own, they just fall silent. The author suggests that they may never have actually seen one of their own die in battle before. They've never seen one of their own killed, because they seem genuinely shocked that one of them was killed. So that can indicate a lot of things, like maybe the things that they fight haven't actually fought back so hard before. Maybe they've just... I don't know, it's so strange because the dwarves are so numerous at this point. They're everywhere in the Deep Roads. Why is it now? Why does this conflict seem so out of nowhere? It just... Did something happen? Was the Imperium doing something? Was some ancient elven bullshit down below from... not talk about that yet. Horror of Hormak. Go read Horror of Hormak. Might explain it, but I don't think they do. I really don't. It's just so strange, this codex. Anyway, apologies, let's just get on with it. It's a codex that I love, but it baffles me so much because I have so many questions, you know? So one of them growls and stamps out a torch before they retreat into the darkness. They seem very, very happy about darkness. They don't want to be followed, and they don't like light, and maybe they just can't see very well in the light, so maybe they have like low light / night vision, kind of similar to how cats do. Something like that, maybe? So, while they were winning, the scaled ones, 100% they were winning, they just, as soon as one of their own is killed, they immediately retreat, as if they didn't understand the concept that one of them could be killed. I want to bring that up one last time because it's just very, very strange. I just don't understand it. This codex makes no sense, and I love it. Ultimately, what this part tells us that, one, they can be killed. It's not like they're impossible to kill. Rarely anything in Dragon Age is impossible to kill. Closest thing being an archdemon or something. And two, the enemy now knows that they can be killed. And three, they should get away from the enemy. They are intelligent enough to understand these three things. So part 4, I don't have much to say about part 4 because it's mainly just reflection and doesn't really indicate much for the lore, but they go and try and find them again because the dwarves have taken heavy casualties and they want to go scout out what could have happened. And they come across an amber light, and that was pretty much all it was for part 4. Part 5. The skilled ones have set up camp. They have some sort of civilization. It does appear to be rather primitive though. But given the time period compared with like what the humans are doing, especially in the south, yeah, it checks out. In the south, they're still very tribal in nature, so it's not too surprising. There's this golden altar fashioned into the shape of fire. Puts me in mind of the... You know how you can decorate Skyhold and you have your throne, that you can have a unique throne, like, you know, you can have it... The Andrastian throne, for example, is what I want to point out. It reminds me of that, where it's literally just a throne that's made to look like fire. So it reminds me of that a lot. But it's an altar this time. So what they've done with this altar is they've impaled the slain dwarves on the flame points, and they are draining them of blood, leaving only bone that's been wrapped in grey, dead skin. So there's noticeably feminine, at least in voice, skilled ones, wearing robes, chanting, before they're raising this basin of blood to the altar as the other skilled ones bow low. So they revere fire, then? They have some sort of religion. Are they sacrificing blood? It's a big fat what? What is going on right now kind of situation, but I do want to point out that there is a female that seems to be in a priestess kind of status, I guess, compared to... I don't know if they're trying to indicate... No, there are females as well, but also this female is in what seems to be some kind of position of power. What happens next is the robed scaled one produces fire from its hand and mouth, and sets fire to the blood. So, okay, they can use magic? So they can be mages? Does that mean they can also enter the Fade? And if so, why have we never seen them before? Or maybe they're more like dragons? Because they're scaled? They seem to revere these flames, like sacred fire kind of thing. And they have this altar of gold in the shape of fire. And they set fire to their fallen foes. Almost, they're kind of not setting fire to their foes, but they've impaled them on the points of the flames from this altar. That's gotta mean something, right? Am I digging too deep into it? Maybe? It feels purposeful, ceremonial. There's gotta be a reason for it that we're just not quite getting. Why take the bodies? Why drain the blood? Why set the fire? Why put the bodies on this golden fire? Why do they want the bodies' blood to remain in the deep roads? Why are they doing any of this? Was this the purpose of their initial attacks? Or is this in some way to make up one of their own that died? There's no real explanation, because also we're getting an outsider's perspective of it, but there's so much to think about. So, when the dwarves return later, only an hour later mind, the camp, well, the encampment, so to speak, the scaled ones, the bodies, everything, including the altar, all of it's gone. They don't mention the altar specifically, but we can presume also the altar, because what they mention is that only the basin remained, charred around the edges, the thing that contained the blood. Why leave that? Of all things? Did they leave it as a warning? It just feels like the one thing that they could have easily taken and they didn't. It was something that I'm gonna call her the priestess skilled one, lifted up in her hands, so it's not exactly this giant, unthinkably heavy thing. Not unlike what they describe with the altar, which would have been difficult to get rid of. They got rid of all of it in an hour. How? What does it mean? Do they fear the blood? Did they destroy it to appease some deity? I don't... It bothers me so much, and I love this codex entry. I want you to sit and imagine me, and I think I mentioned in my Catalash video, I am terrified of caves and caverns. I want you to understand how much hell this DLC was for me. I spent the entire time on the verge of tears because the entire DLC was just underground. And then I come across this shit! To be fair, it did actually distract me from the actual fear, but then I'm like, oh, am I gonna get attacked at some point by these things? It was just such a good codex to come across. I was freaking out. See, when you do enter the place where you do find about, I don't want to spoil it, when you do enter that transition from below the deep roads, where, you know, it's this dark corridor, for lack of a better term, with these bunch of random lights that look like eyes, I'm gonna admit to you guys, I cried. I was so scared. So yeah, this codex did stick with me. It's one I've never really forgotten, and I love it so much, and there's so much to think about. And yeah, that's all I have on the codex. The next part is just extra stuff. Okay, that's all we have in canon about the scaled ones. And I know a few of you are probably disappointed by that because, like I said, it is one codex that confirms it. And, you know, not taking into account the art I mentioned earlier, which, like I said, is dubious whether or not that is one of the scaled ones or something else. I personally think it is, but, you know, it's not confirmed, so it's more so I really hope it is. So you're probably wondering at the end of that, well, what are they though, besides reptilian men? Like, why do they exist? Why are they there? Why are they like that? Where did they come from? These are all excellent questions that we don't have the answers to. However, it's not an explanation per se, but there is a point in Inquisition with Cassandra of all people, and I'm sure you've heard this in one form or another, where she talks about her family, the Pentagas. The Pentagas are interesting for many reasons, but two big reasons. One, they're Navarran royalty. They're the royal family of Navarra. And two, they're renowned for dragon hunting. And consequentially of that dragon hunting, a few of the Pentagas did become Reapers. Reapers? A few of the Pentagas became Reavers. Essentially what a Reaver is a warrior who has drank the blood of a dragon to take on its vitality, its strength, its essence in a way. You can get it as early as Origins. I personally haven't tried it yet in the games, but I'm looking forward to it because my next playthrough of Origins is gonna be a human warrior, so I'm excited for that. Yeah, Morrigan romance, yeah. Anyway, sorry. But it's interesting because Cassandra herself has something to say about the members of her family who became Reavers. I can't recall if they drank enough dragon blood, or they just kind of congenitally passed down that gene, I guess, to their children far enough that enough dragon blood was part of them that they started to develop scales. They became scaled. And I don't recall if that's in any other part of lore. If I find it in post while I'm editing this, I'll put it in the video, but if I haven't found it. But I would love to know if someone else has found any other references to that, because that, well, it's cool, like, obviously, yeah, no. I can become a dragonborn? Yeah, that's awesome. But, you know. It's silly, but I feel like in some way this could explain why the scaled ones are a thing. It doesn't necessarily, but it's still there at the back of my head. Next, I want to talk about two other occasions in the lore where scaled men were mentioned, and there are these two codexes. Let me find them a sec. Yes, indeed, I found them. I have them stored away somewhere in my Scrivener. The two other codex entries that mention, kind of mention scaled ones or lizard men are Mysteries of the Frostback Basin and Tattered Tome. And I do want to say, I don't take these two codex entries seriously because they're written as if they were written by a conspiracy theorist. You know, someone that talks about, what was it, ley lines and moon men. Let me find an exact quote real quick. The Snake Kings of the Earth, in their battle against Tevinter's allies from the moons. I of course know about them, as I hope to prove to the reader beyond a doubt. The guy essentially talks about moon men and how Tevinter allied with people from the moon, and how it's borderline Hollow Earth conspiracy theory kind of stuff. And I want to mention I actually hate these codex entries. The impression I get is they're played for laughs, like, look, conspiracy theorists exist in medieval times too, ha 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 ha. And I just kind of hate it. Quick tangent, I just kind of hate any kind of lore that tries to be meta. For example, half the conversations between Cole and Solus in banter, talking about movies and TV shows that exist in real life, but vaguely enough, if you didn't know what they were exactly talking about, you would assume they're talking about some obscure thing that's mysterious and interesting. It's not. They're talking about the TV show Supernatural and the movie Meet Joe Black. Like, no. Why would you waste banter on that? Did you know, quick tangent, that in Dragon Age Origins, there is an entire scene dedicated to making a Superman reference? I've never seen Superman, so I never got that. I saw that scene happen and I'm like, what implications is this for the lore? What? And then I looked it up, I'm like, what did this scene mean? What could it imply? And it's like, oh, it's a Superman reference. I'm like, oh, fuck. Really? I know I might stand alone in this, in my hard stance against making meta commentary on things, but just let Dragon Age be Dragon Age. You don't need to make real world references to things. I hate them. It just takes me so far out of my immersion. Before we go too far into Negative Valley, I want to finish up by talking about, well, what essentially became of the Scaled Ones, or what could have at least. So we'll finish up with that. I have my own theories about where they came from and where they went, but that is just me. I haven't really seen anyone else discuss that part of it, just more the we don't actually know anything, and I want to emphasize that we don't know the hard facts to this. This is one codex and maybe some art that could represent that, you know? So where they came from, okay, I don't know where they came from. They could come from what I mentioned with Reavers. They could be the final stage of Reaver, like some half dragon, half person thing. And that is kind of interesting, although I know people theorize that Kunari or that. I don't know. I'm not convinced on anything regarding the Kunari. Okay, tinfoil hats on, people. Yeah, we're ready. I believe in some degree that Elgernan wasn't necessarily an elf. I believe he was some dragon, perhaps eldritch horror. And related to that, I believe maybe, just maybe, and there's a very, very big maybe, maybe he was a Scaled One. I do want to do a video on what I think about Elgernan. That is going to be a Fury video that I actually have a script coming up for. Because there's a lot of lore backing up the fact that he was just a dragon. Not just a dragon, but there's a lot of lore pointing towards imagery of him being a dragon. And I just want to talk about that, but maybe that's what he was. Maybe... The point I want to make is maybe the Scaled Ones go that far back to Arlathan. There, like I said, there's no hard facts, that's just my tinfoil hat theory. I just want to throw out there. As to where they went, for reference, this codex happened 2,000 years, well, around 2,000 years before the events of the games. This was before the Blight, this is before the Dwarven Empire fell, this is Cadhalash era. If we have not seen the Scaled Ones in all that time, there's no other references to them. I think they're gone. Really, I think... If anything, I think the Blight would have wiped them out, probably. Maybe there's gonna be one or two that still exist in little pockets, like, the dwarves survived, but from what we can tell of what the Codex reveals about them is that they seem sort of nomadic in the deep roads, and that, once again, speculation, but I think they got wiped out by the Blight. I think the Darkspawn took them out. I can't see any other reason as to why we haven't seen anything else. So yeah, I think they're gone. I don't think we're gonna see a Scaled One, or at least we'll probably read a codex about them, if anything, or someone will mention them. Or maybe they'll turn up in a DLC or something, but I have extreme doubts that they're gonna come back in any capacity, especially given that's a new character model they have to make for these things. And yeah, especially if they're sentient, they're meant to be like another race of sentient humanoid beings, like elves or Kunari or dwarves or humans. I don't think they're gonna do that. If I was writing it, I wouldn't. Maybe in a book, actually. You know what? They might mention it in a comic or a novel or something. That would be so interesting. As a final note, I want to say that it is still very interesting that it was the Descent DLC that they introduced this idea. Not even in the base game. If it was in the base game, I would think nothing of it, like they wanted to add a bit of mystery, but it's the fact that it's... The Descent DLC just feels so important to the lore, and you should be paying attention to every little detail, because it could mean anything and everything. So it's... I don't know, it just stuck with me for that reason. If it was in Trespasser, I'd be like, yeah, no, they're bringing them back. It's in the Descent DLC, so maybe it has something to do with the Titans, maybe it has something to do with the Old Gods. there's a lot that could happen with them, but I don't know. I really do think they're gone. I think we're just gonna get mentions of them and they could implicate some other piece of lore. I'm in my own little bubble in my own head coming up with this stuff. Like, I'm taking in information that other people have said, what I can collect from the codexes, I'm coming to my own conclusions, but I would really love to hear input from someone else saying, well, actually, so that'd be so great. I would love that. I really want to know more. So, yeah, other than that, yeah, that's all I've got to say on the topic. I hope this gave you a lot to think about, maybe? And I hope it opened some kind of discussion, because it's really interesting lore and very obscure lore, and I feel like that's becoming a theme on the channel, actually. Just bringing up things that got forgotten or passed over by your casual player. So anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you all, and have a great day.